In a calm Atlanta park on a warm afternoon, a 14-year-old black teen sits quietly on a bench, immersed in a book as he waits for his mother. But his calm is shattered when a wary woman approaches, accuses him of suspicious behavior, and contacts the police. Tension builds fast as officers arrive, treating the boy like a suspect. Just as the situation edges toward chaos, a sleek black SUV rolls to a stop. Out steps the city's mayor, his mother. What unfolds next stuns everyone present and ignites a powerful dialogue the entire neighborhood will remember. The late-day sun poured golden light across Riverside Park, slipping between the swaying oaks. Kids' laughter rang from the playground while parents relaxed nearby, chatting. Runners moved steadily along the paths, earbuds in, lost in rhythm. Birds sang above, completing the perfect scene until it all abruptly changed. Seated on a time-worn bench near the fountain, Darius Bennett rested, a book on his lap. At 14, he was tall for his age, his frame slim from hours spent on the basketball court. He looked calm and focused, lost in his reading. A plain white tee and well-worn jeans hung comfortably on him, his sneakers slightly beat up but clearly cared for. His deep, observant eyes moved steadily across the page, though he occasionally checked his phone, watching the minutes pass. His mom, Monica Bennett, had said she'd swing by after wrapping up a late meeting at City Hall. The wait didn't bother him. Darius liked the atmosphere, the open air, the hum of life surrounding him, and the warmth of the sun against his skin. It was one of the few places where he could breathe easy, let his mind wander freely. But today something felt off. Something felt off. A faint buzz of unease settled in Darius's chest. He shifted his posture, lifting his eyes from the page. Across the park, a woman sat on a nearby bench, not watching the children or soaking in the peaceful afternoon, but watching him. Margaret Lewis, mid-40s, sharp-jawed with icy blue eyes, sat upright, clutching her handbag with rigid fingers. Dressed in neatly ironed khakis and a crisp button-down, her hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun, she studied Darius with unsettling focus. Each time he moved or glanced up, her eyes narrowed slightly. At first, Darius tried to dismiss it. Maybe she was waiting on someone. Maybe he was being paranoid. But the longer it went on, the heavier her stare became. At one point, she began whispering into her phone, shooting him quick glances between her words. Darius's fingers gripped his book more tightly. He was no stranger to this kind of look, people clutching their bags when he passed, crossing the street when they saw him, lingering stares thick with quiet judgment. It always stung, but he'd taught himself to ignore it. Today, though, was different. Today, he was alone. Then Margaret stood, marching toward him with a clipped stride. Darius straightened, his spine stiff with caution. Her voice cut through the quiet, sharp and accusatory. "What are you doing here?" Darius answered calmly, though his heart hammered in his chest. "I'm just waiting for my mom." He kept his tone respectful, measured. "Waiting for your mom?" she repeated, folding her arms, her gaze dissecting him. "I've seen you sitting here for a while. People like you don't just hang out in parks for no reason." Darius's stomach knotted instantly. He understood exactly what she meant by people like you. "I swear, I'm not doing anything wrong," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "My mom's on her way. She's just running late." But Margaret didn't budge. "Do you have ID? Anything that proves you're supposed to be here?" "No, ma'am," Darius replied, his voice tightening. "I'm only 14. Before he could say more, Margaret had already pulled out her phone and began to dial. "I'm calling the police." Panic surged through Darius's chest. "Wait, what? Why?" "I haven't done anything." She turned away from him, speaking deliberately and loudly into her phone. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious individual," she said, her voice echoing across the park. "Young black male, maybe 14 or 15. Been loitering here for a while, acting odd. I think he could be a threat." Darius sat frozen. His mind spun. Should he stand? Should he leave? But he knew running would only make it worse. He clenched his fists in his lap, grounding himself to the bench as heat pricked at his eyes. Around him, people began to watch. Some murmured. A few lifted their phones, recording. But no one intervened. Minutes passed. Then came the piercing cry of sirens, growing louder. 2 patrol cars came speeding into view. Stopped just inside the park entrance, red and blue lights strobing through the trees. Darius's breath caught as the first officer stepped out. He was young, tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform sharp and his gaze instantly locking onto Darius. "Officer Reed, let me see your hands." Darius rose slowly, lifting his hands as ordered. "Darius, I didn't do anything, sir." "Officer Reed, we'll determine that. Just stay put and don't move." The second officer, Sergeant Daniels, moved with more caution. Older, more measured, his eyes swept the scene carefully. Margaret stepped in, pointing squarely at Darius. "Margaret, that's him. He's been sitting there watching people almost an hour. I think he's scoping the area." "Officer Reed, all right, son. We need you to answer a few questions." Darius's voice quivered as he responded. "Darius, I'm just waiting for my mom. She's picking me up soon. I swear I didn't do anything." He stayed frozen, hands still raised, while Officer Reed edged closer, one hand hovering near his holster. The flashing lights, the curt commands, it all made Darius's heart thunder in his chest. A crowd had started to form, the atmosphere thick with tension. Some onlookers whispered, others silently filmed, their phones raised and faces etched with unease. Margaret stood off to the side, arms crossed tightly, a smug tension in her face, convinced she'd done the right thing, though a flicker of doubt crossed her eyes. Her phone remained clenched in her palm like a weapon of self-righteousness. "Officer Reed, step away from the bench, son." His voice was firm, not aggressive, but it left no room for hesitation. Darius swallowed the lump in his throat and obeyed, moving slowly, carefully. "Book. That's all." His voice cracked slightly, a mixture of fear and frustration bubbling to the surface. He stepped away from the bench, hands still outstretched, palms open to show he had nothing to conceal. "Darius, I told you. I'm just waiting for my mom. She should be here any minute." "Officer Reed, we'll figure that out in a moment," he cut in, flipping open a notepad. "First, do you have any ID?" "Darius. No, sir, I don't. I'm only 14. I don't carry ID." Reed looked over at Sergeant Daniels. The older officer, quiet so far, squinted slightly, evaluating not just the boy, but the situation. He didn't speak, but something in his eyes flickered with awareness. Then Margaret stepped in again, the click of her heels sharp against the paved walkway. "Margaret, he was watching people. I noticed him over an hour ago. He just sat there. Wouldn't even leave when I told him to. He's loitering. Probably scoping the place out." Her accusations struck like stones. Darius felt them in his chest, each word squeezing tighter. He turned to her, confusion and hurt written across his face. "Darius, I wasn't doing anything wrong," he said, voice low, cracking. "I was just sitting there reading my book." Voice firm but full of concern. "Are you all right?" Darius exhaled sharply, the tension in his shoulders easing just a bit at the sound of his mother's voice. "Darius." "Yeah, Mom. I'm okay." Monica wrapped an arm around her son protectively before turning to face the officers, and then Margaret. Her expression was composed, but the fire in her eyes made it clear this wasn't something she would let slide. "Monica, can someone explain why my son, who is doing nothing but sitting quietly in a public park, is being interrogated by 2 officers?" Officer Reed shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward Daniels, who stepped forward to respond. "Sergeant Daniels. Ma'am, we received a call about a suspicious individual. Upon arrival, we found your son here. He said he was waiting for his mother, and it appears he was telling the truth." "Monica, of course he was telling the truth," she snapped, her voice controlled but cutting. "This is exactly the kind of profiling we work so hard to root out." Margaret looked like she wanted to vanish into the ground, her earlier confidence completely gone. "Margaret, I didn't know who he was. He was just sitting there for so long and—" "Monica, and that made him dangerous?" she interrupted. Because of how he looks? Because of his skin? There was a beat of silence. The crowd stood still, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. Monica, to the officers, this incident? It's going to be addressed. Publicly. She looked at her son again, brushing his shoulder gently. Monica, let's go home, Darius. As they turned to leave, the crowd slowly began to clap, not loudly, but with steady resolve. A few people murmured apologies. Others looked down, ashamed. And Margaret, she said nothing at all. Let me know when you're ready for the next part. Frightening a minor who was doing nothing but reading a book in broad daylight? She didn't raise her voice, but each word carried the weight of her fury and heartbreak. Sergeant Daniels hesitated. Daniels, we had limited information when we arrived, ma'am. We're not here to make assumptions. Monica, cutting in, but someone else did. And you acted on that assumption, without assessing the reality. My son could have been hurt. For what? Sitting on a bench? She turned to Margaret now, her eyes narrowing. Monica, tell me, what exactly made you so afraid of a 14-year-old boy reading quietly in a park? Margaret looked as if she wanted to shrink into herself. Margaret, I didn't know. I just thought. He didn't look like he belonged. Monica took a step closer. Monica, and what does someone who belongs look like to you? The question hung in the air like thunder. Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it again. She had no answer that wouldn't expose the deep prejudice behind her actions. Daniels finally spoke again, this time softer. Daniels, Mayor Bennett, I understand your anger, and you're right to be upset. We'll be filing a full report and investigating this incident thoroughly. Monica, see that you do. Because this, she motioned to her son, who stood silently beside her, his dignity still intact despite the humiliation. This is exactly why communities like ours don't trust the system. She turned back to Darius, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Monica, you did everything right. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. The silence that followed wasn't just heavy, it was reflective. Embarrassed whispers rippled through the park. The weight of truth had landed, and it could not be ignored. Ready for the next part when you are. Respect your right to be angry. What happened here today isn't reflective of how we want our community or our officers to respond. Monica nodded slowly, her expression still stern but slightly less tense. Monica, acknowledging it is a start, but it's not enough. There needs to be change, not just in policy but in mindset. Daniels gave a solemn nod. Daniels, we'll review the response from our end. And I'll personally make sure this incident is part of our upcoming training, bias recognition, de-escalation, community engagement. You have my word. She stared at him for a long beat, as if measuring the sincerity of his promise. Monica, I'll hold you to that. Because my son is not a statistic. He's not a suspicious individual. He's a child. One of many who shouldn't have to be brave just to exist in public. Nearby, Reed lowered his gaze. Margaret stood silently, her arms now limp at her sides, as the gravity of what she'd said in motion fully sank in. Some of the crowd still lingered at a distance, watching, waiting. Monica turned to Darius, brushing her hand lightly against his cheek. Monica, you okay? Darius gave a small nod, his voice barely audible. Darius, yeah, just glad you showed up. Her smile was soft, protective. Monica, always. And if this ever happens again, you stand tall. You've done nothing wrong. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise. She turned back toward the parked SUV, guiding Darius with her as they walked away from the officers, the accusations, the shameful assumptions. Their steps were slow, deliberate, two silhouettes against the setting sun, casting long shadows across the pavement. But the weight they carried was no longer just theirs. It now belonged to the entire community, watching, learning, and hopefully ready to do better. Let me know when you're ready for the continuation. Monica unlocked the doors with a press of a button, and Darius climbed in beside her. The interior was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound for a moment. Outside, the golden haze of the setting sun bathed the park in amber light, soft, beautiful, and strangely ironic, considering the storm that had just passed. Monica glanced at her son, studying the mix of pride and pain in his expression. Monica, you did everything right, Darius. You stayed calm, you told the truth. I'm proud of you. Darius stared out the window for a beat before responding. Darius, I didn't feel brave. I felt scared. Like no one saw me. Like I didn't matter. Her heart clenched at his words. She reached over, resting her hand over his. Monica, you do matter. And people saw you today. They saw the truth. That matters more than you know. As they pulled away from the curb, the park shrinking behind them in the rearview mirror, Darius sat up straighter. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed. Into awareness. Into purpose. Into something he could carry forward. Behind them, Margaret stood quietly beside the officers, still watching. Her face unreadable now, her posture no longer defensive. Whether her apology would lead to change, no one could say for sure. But the seeds had been planted, and for the first time, she seemed willing to listen. In the days to come, the incident would make headlines. Not for the conflict, but for the reckoning it sparked. Community forums were scheduled. Police training sessions were overhauled. Parents and children talked in living rooms about race, bias, and what justice truly looked like. The echoes of that afternoon in Riverside Park didn't fade. They grew louder and reached farther than anyone had expected. And for Darius Bennett, it was no longer just about surviving the moment. It was about changing what came next. One park, one person, one uncomfortable truth at a time. Her eyes locking with his, fierce with love and pain. Monica, you're right. And it breaks my heart every time. But that's exactly why we don't stay silent. Why we don't shrink. We stand tall. We speak up. We show them who we really are again and again if we have to. Darius looked down at his hands in his lap, then out the windshield at their home. The porch light had flicked on automatically, casting a warm glow that contrasted with the cold not still sitting in his chest. Darius, it just feels like nothing changes. Monica reached over, her hand covering his. Monica, things do change. Not fast enough. Not everywhere. But today, people saw what bias looks like, unfiltered, unedited. And they also saw you, calm, strong, honest. That matters. A long pause passed between them, filled with the kind of silence that didn't demand words. Darius, do you think Margaret meant her apology? He asked quietly. Monica was still for a moment, then gave a measured nod. Monica, I think she saw herself in a way she hadn't before. And that's a start. But words mean nothing without action. We'll watch. We'll hold her and everyone else accountable. Darius finally nodded, a sense of resolve settling into his chest. Not peace exactly, but purpose. Darius, then I want to help. I don't want to just move on. I want to speak. Share what happened. Make sure people hear it from me. Monica smiled, a proud, knowing smile. Monica, then we'll make that happen. You won't be alone. As they stepped out of the car and walked toward the house, the porch light welcomed them home. But in Darius's heart, a new light had sparked, small but unshakable. A voice that would no longer stay quiet. A future that he would help shape, no matter how heavy the past still felt. Monica's response came swift and unwavering, her voice sharp with conviction. Monica, then we start the clock now. Because while we talk about timelines, our kids are living the consequences in real time. Every day that passes without action is another day they walk into spaces where they're treated like suspects instead of students, like threats instead of children. There was a pause. Inside the room, some of the officials shifted in their seats. Darius leaned closer to the door, heart pounding with a mix of pride and nerves. He'd never heard his mother speak quite like this, not just as the mayor, but as a mother. Monica, continued bias, conscious or unconscious, is a systemic issue. It's not about one woman in a park. It's about the culture that taught her to fear a black boy with a book. It's about officers who don't stop to question whether their assumptions are based on facts or fears. The police chief finally replied, his tone more serious now. Police chief. Understood, Mayor. I'll issue a department-wide review and initiate anti-bias training protocols. But we'll need support and accountability from the city to make sure it's effective. Monica, you'll have it. But I want transparency. Monthly progress reports. Community liaisons involved in training. And I want a town hall soon. The community deserves a voice in this. Darius stepped back from the door, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't just speaking for him. She was speaking for every kid who had ever been looked at like they didn't belong. And even though part of him still carried the fear from the day before, something else was growing in its place now. Strength. He didn't have to have all the answers yet. But today, he was learning what it looked like to stand up for yourself and for others. Them like a soft blanket, not heavy, but present, a quiet reminder of everything they'd been through and everything still ahead. Darius, do you think it'll really change anything? His voice wasn't skeptical, just searching, like he needed her to believe it so he could, too. Monica, I think real change takes time, but it starts with people deciding not to stay silent anymore. Yesterday, you were brave, even when you were scared. You didn't back down, and that's powerful. That's how change begins. Darius looked out the kitchen window, where the last streaks of sunset lit the tops of the trees. For the first time since it all happened, the tension in his shoulders eased. He still felt the sting of Margaret's assumptions, still remembered the fear in the pit of his stomach when the sirens wailed, but he also remembered standing his ground. And now, the conversations were happening. The system was being pushed to look at itself. Darius, can I come to the town hall? Monica, you don't just have to come, she said, reaching over and giving his hand a squeeze. You can speak if you want to. He didn't answer right away, but the idea settled into him, warm and electric. Darius, yeah, I think I want to. Outside, the sky deepened into twilight. And inside, in the quiet kitchen filled with notes, tea mugs, and the slow, steady rhythm of change, Darius began to imagine the voice he hadn't known he had, ready to be heard. Forced herself to meet his gaze. I've joined a local community group, she said. We're partnering with the city to organize listening sessions. We want to hear from people, especially young people, about their experiences. Not just listen, but actually do something with what we learn. And I'm volunteering at the youth center on Saturdays. Not to fix anything, but to show up, to learn, to be better. Darius let her words hang in the air. He could see the effort behind them, the discomfort of someone trying to unlearn years of silent bias. Part of him still bristled at the memory, at how quickly she'd acted on fear instead of curiosity, but another part, the part that had watched his mom fight for progress every day, knew this was where change started. In discomfort, in accountability, in action. He nodded slowly. I'm not saying it's okay, he said, his voice steady. Because it wasn't. But thank you for showing up. For trying. Margaret blinked rapidly, clearly holding back tears. I'll keep showing up, she said. They stood in silence for a few more seconds, the cool breeze rustling the early spring leaves. Finally, Margaret gave a quiet, respectful nod and turned to leave, walking away slowly, not expecting forgiveness, but grateful for the conversation. Darius sat down on the bench, the same one where everything had changed. The park felt different now, not just quieter, but fuller somehow. Like it had room for stories, even the hard ones. He pulled a book from his bag and flipped it open, sunlight catching the edge of the pages. And this time, when he looked up, no one stared. Doesn't come from applause, she continued, her tone unwavering. It comes from commitment, from people being willing to unlearn, to listen, and to do better even when it's uncomfortable. We're also establishing a community oversight committee made up of residents, including youth voices, to keep us accountable. We won't let this be a moment that fades. We're turning it into a movement. As the room erupted into louder applause, Monica's eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Darius, seated near the back with a notebook in his lap. He gave her a subtle nod. It wasn't just support, it was solidarity. Outside, the city moved with its usual rhythm, but inside that room, something had shifted. People weren't just talking. They were listening, learning, leaning into the hard work ahead. And though the road would be long and imperfect, Darius knew one thing for sure. This time, they weren't walking it alone. And as the night settled around them, the porch light casting a warm glow over their quiet corner of the world, Darius felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace. Not because everything was fixed or because the world had suddenly changed, but because a seed had been planted. A seed of awareness, of action, of possibility. And with his mother by his side and a community slowly waking up to its own reflection, Darius knew they would keep tending that seed, day by day, conversation by conversation, until it grew into something lasting. Something just. Something better. Because change, he realized, didn't start with perfection. It started with people. And people were starting to show up,